Well, you're live. Keep this too. Well, good morning and welcome to the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. I'm Senator Randy Brock, and I chair the committee. I'd ask for those members of the committee who are present to perhaps identify themselves.
I'm Marty Feltus from House Appropriations Committee.
Seth Chase, Energy and Technology, House side.
And also the vice chair of the committee.
Thomas Chittenden, State Senator, Chittenden County Senate District. I'm on transportation as well as education.
And for purposes of just identification, let's go through the audience so that everybody knows who everybody is at this point, starting with Secretary Quinn.
I'm Secretary Quinn. I'm John Quinn. I'm the Secretary of Digital Services in the state CIO.
I'm Scott Harvey. I'm the State Chief Information Security Officer.
I'm Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office.
Kevin Moore, Director of Legislative IT.
And we have two folks who are joining us by Zoom, starting with Maria Royal. Maria?
Yes, Maria Royal with Legislative Council.
And Mr. Rowe?
Good morning, Doug Rowe. I'm the interim Chief Information Officer for the Vermont Judiciary.
Okay, great. Starting with our agenda today, the first item on the agenda is trying to take a brief look across the enterprise, the entirety of state government in terms of where we are with information technology. As you know, it's been a while since this committee met. And we looked at the enterprise beginning about 2 years ago on a holistic way. And we're going to start with that again to first bring us up to date. And since this is the first meeting of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee in a while, we thought it was useful to perhaps take a look at the state of where we are vis-a-vis the administrative, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. And so we're going to take a few minutes today talk about that. And we're also joined by one other member of the committee who just came in, and that's Representative Sebelia, who is also joining us. Morning. Good morning, Mark. So let's start with Secretary Quinn and the Agency of Digital Services. And perhaps if you would come up and just give us kind of a brief overview on where we are.
For the record, I'm John Quinn, Secretary of Digital Services. As you all know, the last year has been extremely trying on everyone, whether you're a state employee or just a citizen of Vermont or a citizen of the world. I guess the way I would put the last year is, while trying, we were able to advance our strategy leaps and bounds over previous years because of the influx of not only CRF money, but the ability to cut through red tape and get things done. I would give some examples of specifically in the area of advancing some of our platforms where we have multiple things in multiple agencies on several different, hosted by several different vendors. We're now starting to collapse those things into one vendor to be able to easily support those things, or more easily be able to support those things. Throughout the pandemic, we created over 30 applications to serve Vermonters, whether it be the pandemic unemployment insurance application, which didn't go seamlessly by any stretch, but we had it live in 11 days and we're getting money out the door to people, which was extraordinary. And we were one of the first in the state to be able to do that. We also used one of our preferred platforms to register Vermonters for tests as well as vaccines. We have over 300,000 people that have used that, 300,000 people that have used that system. So it's a proven system. We were able to stand these things up in a very short period of time and really, show our customers throughout state government, our sister agencies, that these are proven platforms that when used in the right manner, are very effective at not only serving the public, but getting things done in an expedited manner. We went from a state of everyone doing audits, or no, excuse me, not audits, but grants in their own way. Some agencies with spreadsheets, some of our biggest agencies with spreadsheets all over the place. Some with pieces of software hosted by vendors, some with internal workflows that I'm not even sure that they were on Excel spreadsheets. We took a centralized approach when we started to do the CRF money, when we started to push out the CRF money to use one of our preferred platforms. Now, on the backside of that, auditing is going to be much, much easier for the state of Vermont. We're going to be able to account for that money and track the money through one application that everyone used, from the Agency of Agriculture to Commerce to Human Services for hospitals to the Department of Labor. It's all in one system, and that data is there for us to be able to audit and assure Vermonters that we're spending their money and accounting for their money in the proper ways.
If I may, a quick clarification, did you say these are new platforms or new use of existing platforms?
So we had been using the platforms, but they were not strongly adopted yet. We were still in the early stages, some of them, and specifically in our case management area, right? Most of the state government uses case management. For those of you that have been around a while, have probably heard the Chief Performance Officer, Sue Zeller, talk about there being 200 different process flows and applications for case management. We've started to centralize those things and collapse those things under one platform to make it easier to use the data across the enterprise, as well as give a consistent look and feel to Vermonters that are doing business with the state. And I think that's really an important piece of it all, is giving Vermonters that modern look and feel with some standardization, so they know how to interact with us, whether it's commerce or agriculture or human services. They have a consistent way of doing that. This next year is going to be particularly interesting because of the additional $66 million that all of you have appropriated to the agencies around state government for IT projects, on top of the $83 million that you appropriated in our budget. So in order to not only track that, but to ensure success of those projects, we've been working on some dashboards that will eventually be public, probably within the next month or so. I don't have one for each of you because it's not prime time yet, but I will turn it around and show you that each one of the 16 projects that you all approved for funding has a dashboard, and you can drill in under scope, schedule, cost, and find out whether it's on track, whether there's issues, get a project description, find out what we've spent to date, what percentage of the project's complete, any notes from the project manager that, maybe, wanted to be highlighted for leadership to look at. So we're using things like that, as well as FTEs assigned, full-time employees. So we know exactly, what we're doing through each one of these projects. I have a bigger list for all of our projects across state government, but this one I wanted to specifically focus on for the legislature because it is that additional $66 million of ARPA funding. With that, I can take some questions. I know that there's probably a million things that I could talk about today, but the $66 million is really where we're focusing right now to ensure that we're getting these projects off to a good start.
Question.
Please.
I have a couple questions, actually. Just, that's great. Love to see that dashboard. Just a little bit about the process for it being updated. So how does a project get updated? How regularly? Whose inputs are going into that? Who's double checking that?
Yep. So it will be live to the public, and as project managers make updates to our internal project management system with their notes weekly. It will be updated.
Okay, and how will we know if there are challenges? So from that dashboard, how would we know?
Right. So we use a color system, kind of like a
Yes,
stoplight,
same. So we've seen that before.
green,
right?
yellow, red.
Okay,
And it'll be hard to see, but as you see, there are some red dots already on here, right? Some things being called out where projects don't have resources assigned yet. So it's been called out and it's in a red position because we need to identify resources in order to get that project kicked off. In most cases, those projects don't have signed contracts yet, so it's not the end of the world. But the project manager is calling it out saying, don't forget this, right? We need to make sure leadership is looking at this and assigning the right people.
so the red, green, blue, or
Red, green, yellow.
red, green, yellow, excuse me. Geez, seems like I should remember that. That's also determined by the project manager.
Yes.
And so, okay, so okay. Right. Who's the backstop on the project manager?
So we have a portfolio manager that sits over the project managers in each area. So each portfolio manager usually has 5 to 6 project managers underneath.
Okay.
And reviews the projects with them, talks through the projects with them, ensures that they're doing the right things, as well as the bigger business team, because the entire team, the entire organization will have this information at their fingertips. So if someone's calling something out that isn't right, it'll be brought up through another mechanism on the project team.
And so the portfolio manager and the project manager are meeting weekly on these?
Yeah.
Okay, and this is being updated weekly?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
And obviously, as myself and my leadership team looks through it and sees things, we're asking questions as we go too, like, okay, why haven't we assigned resources yet? And there's, usually an explanation. You can only write so much in here.
Yeah.
And have it, fit to our dashboard, but there's the supporting documentation behind it.
Okay, great. And I know we'll be having a conversation at the end of the meeting about things that we want to take up. This is certainly a very high priority for me. It's a lot of money. It's huge infrastructure for the state. And, figuring out what's the best way for us to just stay abreast of, all of these massive investments and modernizations that are happening, I think is really going to be key. So, thank you. And it's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you all as well. One other thing I
Before
would
we
say.
go on, let me ask another question to tie into what we've just been discussing. What you're talking about vis-a-vis the dashboard are the major projects that are underway, typically that have been funded and are part of the big picture strategy. We're going to be talking a little bit later about the IT oversight matrix of all of the entire universe of systems throughout state government. Are there systems that are not in this particular group that represent either high risks or represent something that we ought to be doing but have not funded that should be brought to our attention? And how will that be done?
Yeah, so there are a number of applications that are what I would classify as high risk across the enterprise. We have, I think my last update was 1,168 applications, down from 1,400 when we started.
What's the number?
The digital services. What's that?
What's the number?
1,168.
68.
So when you look across that, Scott's going to go into the categories on how we formulated high, medium, and low risk. But there are absolutely other applications there. And we can go into some level of detail, but if you want serious depth on those things, we should do an executive session.
Understood.
Yeah. But these projects, every one of them ties into our longer term strategy and the governor's strategy. Our strategy specifically on modernization, cybersecurity. Some of these things aren't specifically called out around cybersecurity, but modernization and cybersecurity kind of go together, right? When you have an application that's 15 years old and you can no longer get security patches for it, it falls under both categories. We have applications on our list that are 50 years old. So when you look at those things, as well as the customer experience, making sure that we're developing and building applications that are going to serve Vermonters in a standard and consistent way. And that's one of our reasons behind the platform approach. We want to make sure that citizens have the same look and feel when they go in and apply for UI, or they apply for a grant, or they need a different service through the state. We want to make sure that it's easy for them. And so one of the things that, you know, we're going to be doing over the next year is single sign-on using one of our preferred platforms. So when an outside person comes in, they're not remembering 15 different usernames and which email address did I use. Well, it may still have that question, but it'll be the same one for all the applications. Same password for all the applications with multi-factor authentication. So we're trying to build systems that are easy for Vermonters, but still secure and can protect our data and the integrity of them.
Senator.
Follow up to that. You said you, the past year created a few new applications. Did the past year put the final nail in the coffin of any of these applications that perhaps proved themselves to be unworthy of holding up to COVID?
Yeah, I think there were a number of them that proved that they were not up to the challenges of COVID, and
but not officially shut down yet.
Right. Because of the size of the applications or the number of people that were using the applications, to transition to something new not only takes money, but a lot of planning up front to make sure we can be successful in the end. But some of those things you see on this list, like UI.
Thank you.
Senator Pearson?
Yeah, good morning. A couple questions, and sorry for being late. The commute was a little longer than I'm used to getting just upstairs. About UI, maybe you touched on this, but obviously it's high profile and an ongoing, maybe more than others in terms of challenges for Vermonters. So is that among the projects, or is it special project? I mean, I'd love just a quick overview and then a follow-up if you have a minute.
Yeah, we've had a number of my leadership team working on a solution for UI. We've talked to several other states. We have a list of them, and we've come up with a strategy that we believe ensures success in the end based on what we know now. So we've broken it into 4 phases. The first phase is really around customer experience and how they enter the system. So the claimant portal, the employer portal, updating that piece. It's a fairly small piece. It's like $3.5 million, which I realize is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in the IT world when you start talking about, some of these systems that we've talked about in the past. The second phase, I think the U.S. Department of Labor is still trying to figure out what to do. There's still a number of discussions going on there. There's a couple different products out there. There's one consortium. Even though the consortiums have been around for over a decade now, only one has worked, and they have one product. So we're making sure that we build phase 1, that front end portal, to be able to work with any of these things, to be able to use a platform that can connect to any of them. And that way, over the next year to 18 months, as we build this first phase, we have more time to understand what the other technologies that are out there, what other states are doing. We talk with, as I said, we talk with a number of states on a regular basis. Our approach has been highly visible to other states. California, Georgia, Arizona, Connecticut have all reached out to us and really like our approach and want to understand in depth how we're taking on each one of these phases to make sure that, we're being technology agnostic from the claimant portal as far as being able to connect to whatever phase 2 is. It sounds weird not to have all the answers for all 4 of these phases, but I think one of the things we've learned is, you take on these big technology projects, It takes you 18 months to 2 years to get through a procurement in some cases. It takes you another 18 months to, 3 years to get the system stood up. And by that time, the technology's changed. And you're using outdated technology before you started. We want to make sure we're doing this in phases that gives us the best chance of being sustainable and supporting something long-term.
So Vermonters would be waiting at least a year until the interface was changed, maybe 18 months.
Yeah, I think we can do it under a year, but my project team feels comfortable with a year. The platform that we're using, we've seen things built very quickly. We want to take our time and make sure that we're matching our business requirements to the technology, but it'll be an iterative project management approach, more of an agile project management approach, where we're taking those user stories and building out the system as we walk through those user stories.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned was the concept of a single sign-on, which I like that idea. Senator Brock and I and others were involved in the business portal, which is similar concept, trying to write a lot of Vermonters are intersecting actually as businesses, whether through the Secretary of State, then they are now able to deal with tax, I think, through online. And so there is that bifurcation where it's not all the administration, because a lot of those logins come through the Secretary of State. Is that also, are you looking to coordinate there so that we really streamline that for users?
We are, Secretary Condos, Secretary Curley, and I are on the governance board of the new business portal, which is built on one of our preferred platforms. So as we build things out, and most people can't put the picture or can't put the pieces together of the puzzle that show this larger design around our portal, right? So we have the business portal going on. We also have different licensing and permit projects going on, all on the same platform, which is going to make it super simple to connect down the road, or much easier to connect down the road and share that data across, as well as have a single sign-on for all of these things to make sure that the user experience on the front end is seamless for the user. So while these things are paid for in different ways and serve different functions, and while some agencies may not understand the why we've picked the technology behind them, there's a master plan behind it to be able to connect these things and give Vermonters a better experience.
As we talk about the master plan, part of the master plan of today's meeting is to make sure that we have all of the agencies of the enterprise have a chance to speak. So I think we'll pass on additional questions right now until we've heard from the legislative branch and the judicial branch, and then come back to questioning all of them, because some of the questions perhaps link all of the parts of the enterprise. So thank you, Secretary Quinn.
No problem.
And
Thank you.
let's now go to the legislative branch.
Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome back to the State House. It's your first time back. It's been interesting. For the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT for the legislature. So I will try to stick to the 10 minutes and please stop me at any point for questions, and we'll go from there. So the last year, you're all intimately familiar with what happened over the last year and what we've changed throughout our environment. Obviously, we went from a legislature that, generally speaking, didn't have an official prohibition on video conference technologies and live streaming, but it wasn't how we did business. We were a roundtable type of conversation. People were expected to come here, sit across the table, shake hands, and talk with their legislators. The pandemic certainly changed how we've done business over the last 16 months here, approximately. And the introduction of video conference tools into the workflow of committees, the chambers, and just general business as conducted behind the scenes with staff offices. In addition, we leverage live streaming technologies now. We're live streaming now. We're on YouTube as we currently speak. It was a convenient platform for us to land on in a short period of time, and it works pretty well as far as getting transparency out to just about anybody with any kind of IT device. any kind of consumer grade device. So it's been interesting. We've streamed thousands of hours. I don't have it handy. I can actually pull it up as we're talking. Thousands of hours of committee proceedings live to anybody in the world with an internet connection, frankly. We've had tens of thousands of views. I just pull that up as I'm looking here for the metrics of it.
If they sent you your little play button yet?
It's we don't have a play button, no. That's pulled up. We have just shy of 7,000 hours of content that was live streamed to YouTube over the last 16 months. It is archived. It is available for anybody to access. The accessibility features have improved, but there's still plenty of work to do when it comes to accessibility. You can't see it here now, but I believe on the live stream we have live transcription on. It could use improvement as well, but it's about 85% accurate right now. 15% inaccurate is the part I really try to focus on. So in terms of art, any kind of acronyms, those types of situations, hard to access. Those are the things we're struggling with, and we'll have to have a continued discussion with going forward as far as our investment in such tools, because it's expensive to make sure we have a good tool set for live transcription. Going forward, it's really over the next 6 months approximately, we're introducing all of what we learned over the last 16 months approximately, and we're taking all of that, the remote world, and bridging it with our in-person world and creating this hybrid environment. How does that work? What's the training aspect look like? What's the workflow look like for the committee assistants who have to run it? And how do we make it as user-friendly as possible? So we have a seamless conversation with those who may be remote, but they feel more or less at the table with us. It's a challenge. It's a challenge that the entire industry, the legislative side of government is still struggling with. And we continue to have conversations with other legislatures about how they're approaching this in this new world. But we are in the process of replacing existing presentation systems that are in primarily the House side of things right now with high quality and intuitive video conference systems to bring at least the video conference into the workflow of all committees. That seems to be the direction we're going. I would defer to the legislative committee on the legislative advisory committee on the State House, who's actively discussing such things right now. And they're looking to issue a report on August 15th to, I believe, joint rules, House rules, Senate rules, and I believe joint legislative management as well, who ultimately make the decisions. But we're preparing as quickly as possible to make sure we're ready to action anything that their recommendations produce. The next piece isn't just video conference, live streaming, and I want to continue to think about these two issues separately. Live streaming is a completely different component and different challenges. Do we want to live stream? Do we want a video conference? These are all big discussion points that are being actively discussed at that committee level right now. But we're prepared to, we're preparing to move and make sure we're ready for January. The other piece that surrounds those two particular components is the policy discussion. When to turn such a tool on, when to turn it off, who decides, what happens when something goes wrong. We had differing policies between the House and Senate at times while we were fully remote as far as whether or not we live stream or continue meeting if the live stream drops or if we have a issue with that. And that's something I think that is going to require a lot of discussion, both at the chairs level to make sure that they understand what's happening, vice chairs in the obviously the event that the chair is absent, and then of course legislative leadership where they want to go with that. And then the chambers, the House chamber and Senate chamber specifically, but really focusing on the House chamber. It's a completely different animal compared to a committee room. So this is a pretty large cavernous room. And we were able to go through and successfully integrate an AV solution to allow for a live streaming and video conference to work quite fluidly in here. The House chamber is different. The way business is conducted is different. And making sure that we understand what is desired in that space is really what we need to in order to, it's the information we need in order to move forward for the beginning of next session. Again, these conversations are being had at a different committee level, and I encourage you to interact with them and let them know what your thoughts are there. I'm happy to bring some thoughts back as well. As far as regular work, we're looking at integrating a enterprise password management solution as one of our areas of cybersecurity that we're looking to improve our posture on. So for those of you who have ever seen the prompts in your web browser, for example, it says, do you want to save this credential? It's something that we not only actively discourage, but prohibit on our infrastructure because it's completely insecure. So in order to supplement the workflow, make sure people have what they need to do their job, we're integrating an enterprise password management solution. Should be done before we hit session of this year. We are also continuing development on a new to us in-house training program. And so this is an area of improvement that we've been seeking for many years now. We had brought on a dedicated IT trainer 2 months before the pandemic hit, and quickly shifted her role into additional user support as a primary function and making sure that we're training people on the use of the remote technology tools that we have leveraged. Now that we are getting to a back in person hybrid approach, we're regaining that focus on the classroom style training and ensuring that we offer training solutions or training programs to legislators and staff, but also making sure that we help the other offices in developing their training programs. So that is it's where we wanted to be 14, 16 months ago. But the pandemic put a bit of a hold on that. And so we're grabbing that one again and running with it. Pretty excited about it. Another issue that we're looking at right now, we're not looking at, hopefully actioning soon. As soon as the state contract for voice over IP is finalized, we'll be looking at doing a full replacement of our existing phone system with a voice over IP solution, higher quality. And then hopefully the cost savings that we receive with that will be able to extend telephone numbers, business telephone numbers to each legislator in a variety of ways. So for example, it could be a soft phone that you just add an app onto your device. It could be a hard phone if that is your preference. It could be a combination thereof. So unified communications is really the direction we want to move. We want to make sure that we have a high quality, high fidelity solution in place. And we're pretty excited about that. And then as time permits, we'll continue to partner with the Agency of Digital Services to bring cybersecurity awareness training to the legislature as a whole. They have secured a platform that we were able to leverage, and we're in early discussions on how to do so. And we'll bring that into our in-house training program as well to make sure that we're providing the tools necessary for legislators to remain safe with cyber hygiene specifically. That's roughly the next 6 months. Then we're looking at 12 months plus. We need to start discussions and start planning for potentially, depending on how these existing conversations pan out, a comprehensive upgrade and likely expansion of the audiovisual presentation tools that we have throughout the legislature. For a point of reference, in 2019, we had a study done, and the report is available on our website. It's from K2. And that report was primarily focused on integrating digital audiovisual presentation tools throughout the State House as we currently know it, and how it was used at that time. We may want to review that again and then potentially talk about a scope expansion, depending on decisions yet to be made again for live streaming and streaming between rooms on an ad hoc, at-will basis. Another discussion that is beginning, but I see a lot of interest in, is the potential of a introduction of a what I would call an e-government platform. So for example, I'm not sure if any of you have ever watched the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives online, not through C-SPAN, but through their website. So live.house.gov is a great example of what I'm talking about. And it integrates a video stream, live video stream or archive video stream, depending on how you're navigating it, in the upper left-hand corner in this particular case, along with the actual content being discussed in that process, whether it's the floor proceedings or committee It doesn't truly matter to that platform, but it really helps provide an additional tool for public or legislative participation, depending on what the policies look like. While you're not in that room, it provides a ton of navigation tools, a lot of bookmarking, and it really allows folks to fluidly integrate with the process rather than have to call a bunch of different people, seek content. Okay. We're still learning here. This is the second time we've used this space since we set it up. So hopefully we're working the bugs out.
How did you know it had dropped?
I saw the lights,
Yeah.
the microphone pucks go out.
Uh,
So it's a quick indication, quick visual. So that's an interesting concept to discuss. It's there are several vendors in that market. So if we were to put out an RFI, RFP, whatever approach we want to take with that, depending on the detail, I imagine we would have several interested parties rather quickly and trying to provide a solution to Vermont.
What is that called again?
So I've been using the term e-government. There are so electronic government platform, and each vendor in the space that I'm aware of will go through and use a slightly different term, but that's roughly what they use. And it's an integration of all our data points, of everything that we do inside here, everything the parliamentarians are doing, whether they're sitting on the House floor, the committee assistants are doing, whether they're entering information, whether it's drafting operations, whoever it is, entering information. We have dozens of content creators in the legislature, and making sure that we have one single pane of glass for somebody to land on and be able to navigate content would be incredibly valuable to those who have never participated in the legislative process before. Perhaps distance has been an issue in the past, or just not understanding how to access the legislature could have been a barrier in the past. And so this is a step. I'm not ever going to call it the perfect solution. There's no such thing as a silver bullet here, but this would be a large step in a direction to ensure that we have distant participation.
Couple questions.
Can we hold the questions until we get
Sure.
the judiciary's presentation done, because we are running close to time?
Another thing, during the pandemic, many of you don't have it here with you, so your legislative iPad. So we've issued iPads over the last several years, and they were content delivery devices is really what they were for. They're not content creation. The pandemic exposed the weaknesses in those devices. Now, we were certainly able to leverage them for most folks, but a lot of people will bring their personal, bring your own device style solution with them, an environment they're comfortable with. And I think it's time to have the conversation on whether or not we as a legislature want to invest in laptops, specific enterprise grade laptops for legislators. It'll aid individual legislators in ensuring that their environment's always up to date, always working, always functional, integrated with our existing solutions, but it'll also aid the IT staff in supporting you rapidly in the event that there is an issue with the enterprise tools that we have to jump on your machine or make sure that it's always up to date. So that discussion, I think, is overdue at this point, but it's a policy change in how we do business here in the legislature. So we want to make sure that it's something that we're not pushing, but that the legislature is pushing. Another thing is we have our archival website, which is essentially everything from 2009 prior. It operates on a completely different platform, completely different databases integrated into it. And it's a burden to maintain at this point for our staff. So we want to go through its legacy systems, and we want to go through and retire that and integrate that content into our existing platforms, make it a little easier for us to maintain, make it a little easier to find for people who are, again, unfamiliar with the process of conducting research, and make sure that it is presented in a similar fashion, which is not the current standard. And then we have some big things happening as well as far as physical space goes. Again, these other committees I mentioned previously are still discussing what physical space and physical layout of the General Assembly looks like. At this point, we're anticipating moving some staff offices over the next 12 to 18 months to different buildings outside of the State House, including legislative IT. We're working on a new data center location to get our equipment out of the basement of the State House. And to ensure that we have room for expansion in the event that we have a large audiovisual expansion, which we anticipate, but again, decisions are out on that. That is hopefully within my 10 minutes. I did check the time, but I'm happy to take questions. I understand, Mr. Chair, that you might want the judiciary to go first.
I would like the judiciary to go first so that we don't miss hearing from the judiciary.
Totally. So I'll get out of the way and
But we will come back for questions. We have the court administrator also with us today, Pat Gable. Thank you for joining us. And I understand that Mr. Rowe, Doug Rowe, is going to be the presenter as the acting Chief Information Officer, and he is on Zoom with us.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Chair. For the record, Doug Rowe, Interim Chief Information Officer for the Vermont Judiciary. We have, and Mike, I think you may be presenting some of the slides, so I'm on slide 2 to talk first about the judiciary's IT priorities for fiscal 22. Many of you, I think all of you, are aware that our efforts over the past several years have been really focused on the replacement of a court case management system within the judiciary. And because of that, we are now nearing the completion of that exercise, and it provides us the opportunity to do a few things that we had been planning on doing for those several years, one of which is restructuring our IT department with the intent of making it a more proactive, more consultative organization, and reducing the kind of reactive nature of that unit. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a moment. But as part of that restructuring, we're in a recruiting effort right now for several roles within our organization. One is the replacement of the CIO. As you know, the previous CIO retired in October of 2020, and we're in the process of replacing Jeff with a Chief Technology Innovation Officer, not just a CIO, but we intentionally wanted to rebrand that role as a Technology Innovation Officer to reflect that our new IT department, as we restructure it, is forward-thinking and innovative and less reactive and more consultative. We're still in the process of recruiting and interviewing for that CTIO position, and hope to have identified somebody in the next month or so. Additionally, we have an IT director position, which is it's a new position within the judiciary, but it's also a position that is a kind of sole contributor position with no direct reports. And the intent there is to have that person focus on things like changes, deliberately managing changes to our infrastructure, including our applications and our hardware and networking, project management, and other focus areas that the CTIO guides that person to support and provide. You may also remember that Jesse Giambattista, who used to be our infrastructure manager, left our organization earlier this year in 2021. We have an interim, we have a lot of interims in the judiciary, but we have an interim infrastructure manager that comes to us from the National Center for State Courts, Barbara Holmes. She's playing that interim role until we've recruited and onboarded an infrastructure manager to replace Jesse. We have not yet started that recruiting process because we're waiting for the new CTIO to come on board and effectively ratify the new organization that we have been designing before recruiting for that infrastructure manager. And then several support team members and members of a data analytics team, where we don't have a data analytics team per se within the current RIS structure. And our intent in this new organization is to build out data analytics simply because in an acknowledgement that data analytics is going to be really critical for data-driven decision-making on an ongoing basis, as well as reacting in a more timely manner to data requests and reporting requests from outside of the legislature. So that's our recruiting and retention bullet. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Our third priority, and again, these are not necessarily in priority 1, 2, 3 order, but our third bullet priority here is to stabilize remote hearing in a hybrid hearing environment. As you've heard from the other two gentlemen, this, the pandemic accelerated the need to do remote anything. And in the courts world, that means remote hearings. And we very quickly stood up the infrastructure to support remote hearings. We did that through Jesse's leadership throughout calendar 2020, largely using CRF funds to do so. This physical equipment that has been deployed into the courtrooms, as well as Cisco's WebEx technology for access to the remote hearings themselves. Because it was deployed very, very quickly in anticipation of losing CRF funds after December 31st of 2020, not all of the kind of the tidying up, if you will, of that infrastructure was completed in 2020. Now that some of those funds have been extended and there are additional funds available to us, we are now in the process of identifying areas to clean up that technology, as well as evolve that technology for more advanced use for remote hearings. An example of that is breakout rooms that, I guess, simulate, if you will, bench meetings, as well as private council meetings at each of the council tables, which, although available today, it takes a little bit of work to get that done. The fourth bullet down is completing what we call our next generation case management system project. So I mentioned that we've been working several years on that. We will have that completed. There's still a few tentacles, if you will, kind of satellite portions of that project that are incomplete, one of which is the Supreme Court, which I'll talk about in a minute. That's about to be stood up, as well as some support for attorney licensing and professional responsibility, as well as replacing our current jury management system. So again, the trial courts are stood up and ready to go and are in use. Electronic filing, as you are probably aware, is up and ready to go. The portal is in use, but there are still some tentacles that need to be tidied up. And then one of the things and this is really critical, that we haven't been able to focus on over the past year and a half or so, is once we rolled out the Odyssey environment, the NGCMS project resulting in the Odyssey technology, there have been several really great suggestions for enhancing that technology to increase the efficiency and maybe even effectiveness of the courts, as well as the users of the court system. And unfortunately, those enhancement requests have been placed in have to be placed in a kind of a tracker. We call it the innovation tracker. And only a few of those we've been able to take action on. And our intent in fiscal 22 is to, now that we'll be done with the NGCMS project, is to then change our focus and focus on enhancing that environment, much like we did with remote hearings. Get it in first and then enhance it, doing the same thing here with the Odyssey environment. IT strategic planning is really critical for us. We're at the tail end of the usefulness of our current IT strategic plan, as well as our judiciary's business plan. And so in fiscal 22, with the new CTIO at the helm, we will be developing a new IT strategic plan to help us move forward. The prior IT strategic plan was largely focused on us replacing our court case management system and the ancillary systems around that. The new IT strategic plan will be more innovative and will focus on ongoing technologies for kind of the court of the future, if you will. And then always on our radar is continually enhancing system security, whether it's at the infrastructure level or at the application level. Next slide, Mike, please. So our major initiatives, like I mentioned earlier, in the NGCMS, the three remaining kind of tentacles of that project are the Supreme Court, which is going live in about a month. Attorney licensing, some of you may know that the attorney licensing renewal capabilities are up and live, and that has been live for about a month or so. There's a second piece of attorney licensing for new licensees, which is planned for go live in the August timeframe. And then the replacement of our jury management system, our current plan is to go live with that in the fall of 2021. Once that goes live, we will conduct project closeout activities for the NGCMS project, and we'll shift to full operational mode and exit the kind of project mode for that project. Remote hearing support, again, we're finalizing the implementation of remote hearing technology, and we are entering a pilot for participation in what Cisco calls their Connected Justice Program. Largely based on the pandemic, Cisco has started to refocus and rebrand some of their technologies, such as WebEx, for specific use within particular domains, i.e. the court domain in our case. And so Cisco Connected Justice is their branding name for that vertical discipline and that vertical focus. And we are going to participate in that, since our hardware equipment to support remote hearings, as well as our software, which is the WebEx, are all Cisco based components, that it just makes a perfect sense for us to participate in this program. And then I mentioned the IT department restructuring exercise. The one thing I mentioned that it's consultatively focused. The kind of the core of our restructuring of our IT department and making it more proactive in nature is the development of what we call a service catalog. Some may be aware of that that concept. The service catalog is basically a collaborative effort to work with the users of our IT department, as well as the IT department itself, to very specifically define what are the services that are valued in an IT department and what services we shouldn't be providing, and to codify that and to document that so that we have kind of a handshake agreement between the judiciary and the users, the IT and the users of IT services, to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what services are being provided and can be provided by IT, and then how to access those services. Injection in that service catalog of a consulting position, not a formal position, but a consulting role, as well as a kind of what we might call a customer management role, client management role, will be part of that service catalog. And what this allows us to do is really shift our organization from an organization where we used to build everything to an organization where we are going to rely on managing service level agreements with vendor partners, i.e. C2 as our infrastructure partner, Tyler as our court case management partner, and others as we define. FTR is a good example of that as well, for the record. So we're shifting from we build everything to a discipline and a skill set, which is how to manage the vendors, how to manage the contracts. And that is a slightly different skill set than what we have historically enjoyed within our IT department, which has been a kind of an application development skill set. Next slide, Mike. And the kind of the last major initiative, I mentioned this earlier, but just a focus on data analytics and reporting. Yes, we had reporting. We've had reporting historically. We've been able to generate queries based on requests for data, but this is a more deliberate, more focused attempt to wrap some discipline around how we provide the tools and the processing, the processes, the training we might provide, any support that we might have, both internally within the judiciary, as well as to requesters of data from outside the judiciary. Next slide, Mike. So one of the questions that Senator Brock asked me to kind of speak to is the funding adequacy. And here are three areas where there's a little bit of surety, I guess, lack of surety in terms of our direction and the costs associated with these. The first one is just our public portal into publicly available documentation, as well as to make payments and things like that. That portal is currently provided by Tyler. We stood it up during the pandemic to make sure that the public had access to our documents in a secure way, but we also recognize that the portal is not a perfect user experience for the users of the court. And we're going to spend some time over fiscal 22 to figure out what that means and how we can make that a better experience, either through the replacement of the portal or enhancement of the portal to increase the security as well as the usability of that platform. One area that's really come to light during the pandemic is the management of exhibits and evidence. We have a what I would call a rudimentary evidence and exhibit management solution within the judiciary right now, which is effectively storing, and I'm talking primarily about audio and video files, large file exhibits and evidence. Where largely the solution right now is to store it on a shared drive and gain access to that shared drive through our case management system. In fiscal 22, our intent is to conduct a formal exercise to go out to the marketplace to research the marketplace in terms of what commercially available exhibit and evidence management systems exist. And I know of a small handful right now that are emerging in the marketplace, again, largely because of the pandemic. And so we want to be very, very careful and deliberate about how we go forward and acquire and implement such a system. And then, of course, how we integrate that with our public safety partners, our other justice partners, such as the state's attorneys, as well as our internal case management system. And like I mentioned earlier, the continued advancement of our remote hearing technology, as we participate with Cisco in their connected justice model, it's likely that we're going to have some additional spend requests. We just don't know what the costs of those are yet. We're very early on in that project. So once we know that, we'll come back to this body and we'll report back on that. And then the last slide is really around our current risks, and I always put security at the top of the list of that. We're on the final slide, Mike. First of all, we want to make sure that we are extraordinarily secure in the area of protecting PII. And then also just continuing to identify and minimize any potential vulnerabilities, again, both in our infrastructure and our application stack, to make sure that we're not vulnerable to attack from the outside. The pandemic, I've written this as a risk because we don't know yet. We think we're pretty well set up in terms of remote hearings and be able to support remote hearings on an ongoing basis, even if we have to go back to a fully remote hearing model and less of a kind of a hybrid model for remote hearings as well as in person. But we don't know what that's going to be. We don't know what the fall is going to bring us in terms of increased experience with the pandemic and COVID and the Delta strain and things like that. So that's a little bit of an unknown right now. And because it's unknown, I see it as a risk to our overall model. And then I just want to leave you with recruiting and retention again. I talked about recruiting and retention in terms of what we're doing, the actions we're taking, but I'm also documenting it as a risk because as we undertake the recruiting exercise, we're finding that it's extraordinarily difficult. And we've had this discussion with Kevin as well as Secretary Quinn about this and their experience around this. I think it's a shared experience in the difficulty of recruiting experienced and qualified staff into our organization. Some of that is based on salary discrepancies with the private sector, and some of that is simply that the pool of available and talented staff is very, very small right now, very limited. So I see that as a risk to our ongoing evolution of our restructuring of our IT department. And I'll leave you with that. And then I'm, of course, happy to answer any questions during the Q&A period, Senator Brock.
Great. Well, thank you very much. As anticipated, the 10 minutes for each organization has morphed a bit. But that's not unusual. And I think that one of the things that we'll do, our next presentation, which is scheduled for 15 minutes ago, if we can move that, again, consistent with your time availability this morning, to the slot at 11:15, will that work for you? That way we can go ahead and deal with some questions now, and in terms of keeping the schedule. Recognize that this introduction is designed to be an overview from each of the major agencies or parts of state government. And that this will also be part of the discussion that we'll have later on in terms of focusing on those things that we really want to look at and spend more time on in subsequent meetings. We will have another meeting in early August. There are a number of agenda items that we have that we'll discuss a little bit later that have some time pressure for us, and we can begin whittling away at those things that we want to zero in on at that meeting and at subsequent meetings. So for that, if perhaps we could have each of you come up, John and Kevin, and please, as well as Doug on the phone. And now we can take for perhaps 15 minutes or so, just some questions in general. And I know that Representative Sibilia, you had your hand raised.
Great, thank you. I actually have a question for each of them. Start with Secretary Quinn, going back to the single sign-on across the enterprise for a Vermonter. So I worry about that. It's probably a lack of knowledge or understanding about the security of a Vermonter's information. So if you are able to access their password and their username, you now are able to access, them across a number of different programs and entities within state government. So why is having that, is having that single sign-on best practices for security, for protecting people's private data?
Yeah, I think you asked a question that a lot of people ask, right? Like if I don't keep all my stuff in one spot, I'm kind of more secure because they can't get it all at the same time, right? One of the things I had talked about was multi-factor authentication, and I didn't say multi-factor authentication, I said MFA. I used the acronym for that. That sits in front of your, or right behind your login. So if you have the username, if you have the password, you still need to be able to get the code from someone's device, right? That you're getting to get into the system. And that's really just the check to make sure you are who you are. The data still lives on different systems behind the scenes. It's not all kept in one system. When we think about our technology resources across state government and the number of applications we have, when we think about trying to secure 15 or 20 different ways, whether or not they're secure, it's much easier for us to focus on one path in and really harden that path rather than 20 paths trying to get 20 different solutions hardened all over the place.
So I think what I'm hearing is you'd rather focus on guarding one door than multiple doors. But, and that makes sense to me, but are there in fact no other doors, right, that people can enter into?
Right, from the single sign-on perspective, the best practice is sound. It's what all states consider best practice, not all states, but
Single sign-on
companies, and
is
Scott can talk in depth about, the technical reasons behind it. But yeah, we are absolutely following best practices in that regard. And I would say, from a privacy standpoint, we serve a better chance of protecting our data with a single sign-on with multi-factor authentication.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think about multi-factor authentication. I was thinking about it the other day, and so many companies use your cell phone and they send you a 6-digit code by cell phone. And on my cell phone, I've got a password protected cell phone, so you can't get into it. But what I noticed was the 6-digit code appears on my screen before I've entered a password. And I just wonder about, it makes me wonder about the validity of some of the methods that we're using, because that just seems to be so fundamental.
Right. And Scott can go into depth on this, but he doesn't like that feature. It's no longer, I think, best practice to use.
Using SMS is not best
Using the text message is no longer best practice.
So our security is obsolete.
Well, we do have a product called Intune that helps us lock down our devices, and we can lock down the screen to not show that type of thing without a password. So we can customize and configure our security protocols to stop that from happening.
If I may just add a little piece onto that, the other thing that the industry is moving forward with is more of a specific application that you must authenticate to the device first, and then sometimes even authenticate to that application before you get that code. So there are multiple layers that are being added into it now to prevent such instances as what you were talking
Well,
about.
of course, you're trying to do simple sign-on, single sign-on to make things simpler for the user. And what I'm noticing is that the multi-factor authentication methodology is making it impossible to actually use the system. It's the opposite of being user-friendly. And it's just something that I think we're all going to be needing to think a lot about. And particularly as you start passing these applications out so that members of the public are using it to interface to interact with state systems, the harder you make it to do that in terms of the hoops that you have to run through, the less likely people are going to be able to use it and the less comfortable they're going to be with using it and the less more angry they're going to be at us for supporting it.
Right. Well, and I hear you and I agree with you to some level, but imagine having 20 different usernames and
I know,
passwords and
understand.
MFA for each one of those.
Understand.
Right. So we're trying to simplify it while still making sure that we keep the data secure.
Understood.
It's a hard balancing act.
Thank you. Thank you. I have,
Oh, I'm sorry.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Nope. I had one more question, unless we're still in this. Is that?
No, go ahead.
Which was for Pat. And I'll wait for Kevin. So with the case management system still being, well, it's for Pat and Doug, sorry, not to put you, still being implemented. And what percentage of that is done, would you say?
So we've, you know that it's multi-years. that
Yes.
We've been doing this. So
Yeah.
we're completely rolled out in the trial courts.
Yeah.
And that was what we did during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Way different from the way we planned.
Right.
But we did fully roll out the trial courts.
Yeah.
And that's rolled out both in terms of the case management system and also in terms of e-filing.
Okay.
And so the items that Doug has identified that are left were the things at the very end. So we are still kind of amazingly on the original timeline, on the original budget, and for the most part within the original scope, except for some of the user experiences we've had during the pandemic, when we had to do training in a way that was different from what we originally planned.
Okay. My question is around cybersecurity. So with the transition of so much of your IT staff and looking to recruit and bring in folks, can you just help me understand? So what are the resources that you all are bringing to bear to kind of cover that? I know that Doug was talking a bit about contracting, bringing in some other folks, but who has your back right now and who has Vermonters' back in your system right now in terms of cybersecurity with this kind of coming in and the transition of staff?
Yes, so we've engaged people on contract in positions that are normally permanent positions in the judiciary.
Okay.
And so Barbara Holmes, who is a professional with the National Center for State Courts, has a particular focus on cybersecurity. And so we have obviously structural issues. We have our collaboration with the three branches of government. And that's something we're always actively looking at. As in the previous conversation, we talked about the balance between utility, being able to use a product, and then also being able to be secure in it. And that we've experienced that balance even before we go out to the general public, even within the judiciary, judges and court staff who chafe at some, the multi-factor authentication and all the crazy things you have to put in your phone. So part of that is public education. But we also have a consulting firm who we engage, who has provided us with cybersecurity evaluation.
Okay.
We've got a report from them, and then we're going to be doing an update with them. We're going to have them come through again. So we're active in that area. And so I think the fact that the people who are doing that work for us are engaged by contract instead of, through employment really doesn't change our focus in that area. But I would like Doug to respond in a more detailed way if he has anything that he thinks we should add.
And I'm just interested in whether or not you have that evaluation or it's in the process of being done.
We had one evaluation done already.
When?
And now, Doug, do you know the date when we got the
I
first?
don't, but it was sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was about a year and a half ago that was completed. And so
A year and a half ago?
Sorry?
Yeah, just before the pandemic.
Just right, yeah. So it's stale in that it didn't involve, or it didn't address, of course, our Odyssey system, which had not yet been implemented, hadn't been put in place yet. So like Pat said, our intent is to refresh that security assessment. The other thing I just wanted to mention to augment what Pat said is that our data center provider, C2, is also providing us infrastructural security services. So not just application security services, but infrastructural, database level, server level security services as well. So again, outsourced, but as a partner of ours, very focused on security.
And when is that next evaluation? Do you have that scheduled?
It's not scheduled.
Well, one of the things Representative Chase and I have talked about in terms of scheduling for future meetings is we're going to have a meeting that really focuses almost exclusively on cybersecurity, the potential for ransomware and other kinds of threats, as well as resiliency and contingency planning. And that will be a meeting, much of which will probably be held in executive session because of the sensitivity of the issues, but that will be upcoming. Can we move for a couple of questions? First, Senator Chittenden and then Senator Pearson.
Thank you. This is a great opportunity to hear from the legislative, the judiciary, and the administration. One thing that I was wanting to talk to get here from all three of you or whoever would like to speak to it is, I understand judiciary is using Cisco WebEx. I hear legislative. The legislature is using Zoom and then administration on Teams. And I'm not saying I'm advocating for one platform over the other, but when you talked about voice over IP coming online, that's very exciting about soft phones and maybe integrating a voicemail into our email platforms, which I believe is predominantly Exchange across all three. Do you see that possible voice over IP project as an opportunity to align some of our real-time meeting platforms across the three different areas, or is that not a part of the discussion or interest areas between the three of you?
I don't want to speak on behalf of your side of it. So I'll speak to the legislative side of it. We're looking to leverage for the purpose of economy of scale, the existing state contract that's being renegotiated and almost at the end, I believe, for voice over IP solutions at this point. We're much smaller, obviously, the legislative branch is much smaller than the executive branch. So not fully understanding what's available in that contract, I can't answer the question completely. The vision is to, again, towards a unified communications platform, bring in some content management solutions, some client management solutions for legislators at some point, and again, provide some more nimbleness for you folks to be able to interact with your constituents, interact with your other legislators over time. I can't answer it in detail because of that, but that's the intent. As far as legislative side of things, Zoom integration is already there. As far as video conferencing goes, and Teams is already there as far as video conferencing goes, as far as integration with our existing Exchange platform. More to do. There's certainly more to do, but I'll let John, Pat, and Doug answer for the other two.
Yeah, and we also have access to the Teams meetings for our administrative meetings. The WebEx platform that we're working on and the pilot project that we're working on with Cisco really focuses in on trials and the special justice needs that we have. So Doug can talk in more detail about that when you have more time, but essentially we even have had a mock trial for a completely remote jury trial. We haven't actually had a real fully remote jury trial, but what we see as the future is that when the state is able to build out broadband in a way where more people have access, and it's not just to the broadband infrastructure, but that they actually have the devices where they can interact, we see a really great great potential to deliver better access to justice to people, particularly in remote areas and without transportation necessarily, or people who have trouble accessing childcare or don't want to leave their job, where users of the court system, litigants who have to engage, could do that from their home with the right technology. And so the work we're doing in evaluating the WebEx improvements is really designed to make sure that as much as possible, if we're relying on remote technology, we are delivering access to justice. But one of the reasons I wanted to attend in person today is the hybrid model is the biggest challenge for us right now, and the most likely one to be of utility, meaning that there may be some people right now who need to be in a building. Maybe they don't even, have a computer or what have you. Sometimes it's for safety of the proceeding. And there are other people who can only be remote. And, how you set up the room, to what extent a litigant feels that they're really a part of this proceeding. We're all in a circle right now. Doug is sort of behind me on the screen. I think this room is set up pretty well. I know I was watching the pension meeting a couple of weeks ago. That one was a little less so, where everybody was in a circle. And if you were watching on the YouTube, you couldn't tell who was speaking, that kind of thing. So those things are important for meetings, but they become much more crucial when you're looking at equal access to justice. And so that's kind of a unique piece that we're doing with WebEx. But on the administrative side, we're obviously interested in the best platforms we have to conduct our administrative and meeting business.
Yeah. So I would say that Microsoft Teams is something that we had and already paid for through our Office 365 license. So trying to keep costs down, knowing that most of the executive branch, it's internal administrative, small teams meetings, not necessarily public meetings. It was a good tool for us to use. We already had a pretty good adoption rate. So to switch partway through didn't make a lot of sense for us. We have issued some waivers for the WebEx tool and Zoom tool where appropriate, given the public nature of a meeting and needing certain features that Teams doesn't offer. So we recognize that the Teams application isn't the best on the public side, but for internal state use, because of the way it integrates with all of our Office 365 tools and our records retention policies around the state and public records request, all of that stuff plays together. We've decided, to stay with Teams.
Okay. Senator Pearson?
I just want to start by saying, I think you guys have done an amazing job. I mean, it's actually shockingly been successful, right? I mean, to a degree of how few our hiccups have been for state government, for the magnitude of what we've all been through. And it is lovely to sit in a room together. And this hybrid, this is the first time I've been in a hybrid, and it's pretty slick, really. I want just a comment on courts. Maybe I'm a traditionalist, but the idea of a jury trial where jurors are not in the room really upsets me. Just because the stakes are high and you can't have somebody dealing with their email while somebody's life hangs in the balance, I think. But that, I'm sure you're thoughtful about that. My question is, as we're rightly making pretty big investments in our infrastructure, in our technological infrastructure across state government, we have, in the last 10 years that I've been aware of, basically come up against oftentimes, oh geez, we have no budget to maintain this, to upgrade this, to swap it out, blah, blah, blah. I think we have started baking those costs in from the beginning, but I want to check in on that question because there are big dollars flying around and a lot of it's coming through federal grants, and sometimes we're a little looser with that kind of money when it lands on the table. So what is the plan for ongoing maintenance, ongoing, replacement costs, and so that in 40 years, our counterparts are not sitting here and going, those guys in 2021 were just so out to lunch, they didn't even think of replacements. Where are we at with that dynamic?
Start with that, you want me to start? I'll start, George. So our strategy has really been around shifting out of our data center space and off our infrastructure to more of a software as a service, more of an operational expense model rather than a capital expense model where every 4 years or 5 years, we know that the finance system is going to need an upgrade from 9.1 to 9.2, and it's going to cost us $5 or $6 million, and we put it in the capital budget. We're trying to get out of that model where every year, while the costs are a little bit higher on the operational side, we can project out for the next 5 years what it's going to cost us each year and be on the most current version and most up-to-date version of the product without having that big spike at the end. So we're trying to operational the most of these costs for the sustainability piece. The trick is the implementation to get them over there, right? And that's why we still need some of this capital money, some of this ARPA money, is that an initial investment to get us there isn't easy, and it still takes big dollars to get us there.
So very similar, smaller scale with the legislature, but we're doing complete evaluation of what services are available anytime we have a new project or a new offering come up for discussion. We leverage cloud hosted software as a solution services as frequently as possible if it makes sense. There are still certain applications we have within the legislature due to some historical instability in our network connections. We understand that the legislature's job, the business of the legislature can't stop. And so we keep certain applications close to our physical buildings to ensure that we're always working. But if it makes sense during that evaluation process to put it up in the cloud, shift the capital expense to an operational expense, it's much more predictable. You have 3%, 4% changes year over year that are super easy to figure out. And as John said, you can forecast many years out at that point. Brings in additional layers of security, pushes it back on the vendor to ensure that we are up to date, that we don't have outages, and that the cost is generally stable, or outages are minimal. Outages are minimal. That's a fair. We try to shoot for 3 to 5 nines in most cases.
In the judiciary, before I ask Doug to respond to the technical aspect, I would point out that we've had for a number of years something called the Technology Fund. And the Technology Fund was originally instituted quite a while ago based on the collection of certain administrative fees that fund technology expenses in the judiciary. There are policy changes that have taken place in the legislature that do not favor surcharges and fees. And so the combination of some of those policy changes that have taken place, along with a reduction of traffic tickets being issued, means that the long-term viability of that fund for the original purpose is really in question. So we've been calling the attention of the money committees to that for a number of years now. And so over the long run, that source of funding really needs to be replaced. The testimony of the other two branches is also similar to ours, where we're moving to cloud-based services, but I would like to defer to Doug to speak to that more specifically.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. So of course we have the most recent investment in our court case management system, which is not currently a cloud-based system. So as you may recall, we spent capital funds to acquire perpetual licenses for that court case management system, and we're paying what you would think as traditional kind of maintenance and support, annual maintenance and support fees to keep that platform in its most modern state. Any future technologies, and in that technology, even with that technology, we're working with Tyler as they continue to evolve their architecture of their application to figure out when the time is right to move that into a cloud-based environment. They have casually described to us a hosted model of their solution, but we're not confident yet that it's a cloud-based solution that would work here for the judiciary. Future technologies, like I mentioned earlier, the exhibit and evidence management technology, The ones that I'm aware of are all cloud-based software as a service. The only capital spend for acquiring that type of solution would be the upfront costs associated with issuing the RFP and selecting the software. Once the software is selected, after that, it's simply an operational cost associated with the subscription fees for that technology. And as Pat mentioned, that would be our strategy going forward, is to focus on a kind of a cloud first focus.
Well, thank you very much. I realize that we have many questions. I've got a page of them right here, and I know that some of the other committee members do, but we also have a schedule that unfortunately we have to hold to. One of the things that we will do is perhaps as we discuss going forward in the last part of our meeting today, is look at whether or not we reduce some of the key questions that have arisen from this discussion today to send them out to you for written comment after the meeting so that we can get updated. And they also will be the basis for further meetings that we have to zone in on some of the specific issues that are raised here today. But I think I want to thank all of you for giving us an outstanding overview of where we are and what we haven't looked at in the past year, and perhaps some of the things that we ought to look at and consider going forward. So thank you all very much. And I know that I share what Senator Pearson has said, a great appreciation for what all of you have done for Vermont during this pandemic. It's really been amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I have a break scheduled, but of course, being legislators, we don't really need breaks. And so anyone who does, please step out for a moment.
They make me miss my 20-year-old.
But I would like to, we do have an integrated eligibility on for 10:25, and we're 4 minutes late for that. And I'd like to get back on schedule if we can. And so ask the folks for integrated eligibility to come on. Please, if you need more chairs to the table, or if you want to be up at one time, that's fine. Just move the chairs right up. Okay.
It's fun to see the technology that we're going to be using.
Absolutely.
It seems to be working pretty well.
Well, good morning, and thank all of you for coming today. It's a big subject, integrated eligibility, and perhaps why don't we have everybody just introduce themselves from my left, your right to left.
Sounds great. Good morning. Good to see everybody in person. This is first time back in the State House since before the pandemic, and it feels great to be here today. My name is Sarah Clark, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Agency of Human Services.
Morning, everybody. My name is Darren Prail. I'm the Agency Director of Digital Services, dedicated to the Agency of Human Services.
Morning, everybody. Good to see you. I'm Joe Lisinski. I'm a Enterprise Director for the Department of Vermont Health Access. I'm the executive sponsor for the Integrated Eligibility and Enrollment Project.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rick Stevens, and I'm the newly hired IANE Director for the state of Vermont. I've been with the state for 13 years, serving in a leadership role for Department of Labor and ADS. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you. Who wants to tell us all about integrated eligibility?
I will start and we'll join together. It's a team effort.
Okay.
So thank you. Right off the bat, I just want to say thank you for the committee for the time and the opportunity and the ongoing support that we've had over the years. So, let's see. Next slide, we have the agenda. Just quickly want to review what integrated eligibility and enrollment is. Want to talk about what projects we've completed over the last state fiscal year, what the current projects are, talk about the federal requirements that we're addressing, and then the roadmap looking ahead, and then we'll get into some budgeting numbers. So, thank you. Next slide, please. So what is the IE&E program, Integrated Eligibility and Enrollment? We currently have two systems, the Access system and the CEBL system, that function as our eligibility enrollment for health and human services. We are looking at ultimately getting down to one quote system, but The overall business value is making sure that Vermonters have an easy and efficient way to apply for benefits, receive the benefits that they need in a timely fashion, and make that customer experience more positive as we continue to move forward. You'll see in the slides here that our goals throughout the projects that we have, a lot of them deal with making sure that we address the federal requirements and what's mandated, making sure that we're in compliance with our federal partners, CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and FNS, the Food and Nutrition Services. And as I mentioned before, the improving the customer, the Vermonter experience. Next slide, please. And stop me and ask a question if you have any. So completed projects over the last state fiscal year. The business intelligence effort, the OBIE into OFI migration project. So this, we have over 100 operational reports. We put together a migration effort to get to a new environment, to be able to produce these more timely, making sure that we can meet our federal mandates for reporting purposes. The next effort is the authentication with the document uploader effort. So this is another compliance effort that we undertook. This made sure that for the Vermonter experience, we went from 2 logins to 1 login. So much easier on the Vermonter to apply for benefits, and also provided electronic capability to upload documents. So that helps the Vermonter for applying. It helps the state workers determine the eligibility quicker and more effectively. The next one is the MABD Medicaid for the aged, blind, and disabled online application pilot. So working with the feds, one of the requirements was to make sure that Vermonters have a way to electronically file their application. This pilot dealt with Vermonters being able to call the call center and enable one of the call center staff to electronically enter the application information, which got the application process moved along more rapidly. So that was completed also. Next slide, please. So active projects going on right now. For the Medicaid aged, blind, and disabled population, there's a self-service application. We talked about the pilot that allowed them to call a call center. This is actually providing a web front end where they can go on for this population group and fill out their application, apply for benefits. It met one of the requirements from CMS. And again, it addresses user experience and better sort of venue for the Vermonter for benefits. The MAB automatic renewals. So this is an effort we're working on right now. It's in a pilot phase. There's a certain subgroup of the MABD population that, based on their income and resources, they can be automatically renewed, so they don't have to go through the challenge of, hey, where do I fill out my application or my renewal application and make those phone calls. They can be automatically renewed for another year. We have a pilot phase going on now. We've been able to process 800 or so of those renewals, and by December, this will be fully functional, operational, and automatically enabled. So that's a good positive effort for Vermonters. Another active project, the premium processing project. So this right here is another experience where the Vermonters will be able to work directly with the insurers regarding their premiums, should they have related to their healthcare coverage. This was to go into effect last year, but because of the pandemic and input from the insurers, we moved it to this open enrollment period. We are on target for this to go live this November 1st. Again, improves the customer experience. And now the roadmap planning session. So roadmap planning activities. From previous testimony, you may recall that we talked about bringing on a technical assistance vendor to help us with procurement activities, leverage their experience their knowledge from work with other states. We executed a contract with NTT Data last December. They've been actively engaged with the state, working on road mapping efforts for IE, helping us put together recommendations for the sequencing and prioritization of the IE solution, put together the risks and dependencies. They're to deliver their final artifacts within the next week. We, the state, will then work with them to come up with what is our integrated eligibility roadmap. And I know that from previous testimony, there have been questions around what is IE, how do you define it, what's the cost, what's the time frame. So I just want to take a second regarding that. Part of our approval process for our efforts, we'll get the roadmap recommendations finalized. We'll work with our steering committees, our governance structure to put together what is integrated eligibility. We'll approve that in internal sort of approval, and that triggers us to kick off what's called an IT ABC form, which is a business case documented form that gets approved by finance, gets approved by Agency of Digital Services, gets approved by the business, and it will clearly articulate what's in scope, what's out of scope, what IE is defined as a project. It will get into what's the time frame and also what's the cost, and the cost will be broken up by what's the DDI cost, design, development, implementation costs. So the implementation funding amounts, and then also what's the M&O, the maintenance and operational costs. And so we're going to get the road mapping effort completed. We will then approve it through our governance structure, and then we'll trigger the ABC form to be completed. And at that time, we will have the ability to work with you, be able to share that broader picture to answer the questions that have come before the committee before. And we'll be tracking and monitoring the project as we always have through our funding, through our, I'm not sure what to call our accounting services. So I don't know if there's any questions around that, but that's the majority of the work we're doing right now, and that will be what we're working on moving forward in the future. Next slide, please. Meeting federal requirements. We've mentioned a number of projects that are compliance items that we're addressing. We're doing that. We also wanted to bring up, we mentioned in the last testimony that as we file our implementation advanced planning document, which is our funding mechanism with the federal government, last July, when we filed our APD for IE, FNS and CMS came back and required that we go ahead and complete what's called a CAM toolkit, a cost allocation methodology toolkit. It's a very labor-intensive effort that John Zeneker and Marie Hayward and Marcia Shells from ADS took on with a number of staff, and over the course of a couple of months, we're able to complete it, which is quicker than what the feds had originally estimated for us. But we got that completed and finalized what our cost allocation is moving forward for IE. Got that approved in March, and the feds approved our IAPD, our funding for the projects moving forward for the fiscal years. So as we move forward with the road mapping work, we'll identify if there's any changes there that need us to update the CAM toolkit, and we'll file those accordingly with the feds along with our APD updates. So we just wanted to reference that there because it was in past testimony. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, some of this I've already touched upon in terms of the current projects, the in-flight projects, wrapping those up. And then the biggest piece is the road mapping effort, making sure that we work with our sponsors, work with our governance structure to get that approved, moving along the process for completing the ABC form, which then triggers the project charters and all the other artifacts that go along with project management. We will also identify, as I referenced before, any necessary updates in our APDs and our funding requests. And we will update this committee and others as appropriate. I don't know if there's any questions anybody has on what's happening. If not, then I will.
Representative, did you have a question?
It's like you read my mind.
I saw your hand beginning to move.
Just the APD, so that's something that is done regularly.
There's an annual update. We do every July or August, get that submitted for the next 2 fiscal years. And sometimes there's wiggle room with that, depending on what changes are made with the feds, but in general, that's what it is.
Okay.
And we can file updates as needed. So if there's a reason in January that all of a sudden there's some significant change with the feds are requiring for a program that we need to add money to the effort, we can file an update to an APD, but in general, that's an annual update every August.
Oh, okay. And just in really simple layman's terms, that is to do what?
It's to request from the federal government their share of the dollars for our projects. So they will approve the projects and the funding for those projects from FNS and CMS.
And we have a bigger project than 2 years out, right? I mean, so can you just just help me understand that again, and kind of like for dummies?
So the bigger project in terms of the IE effort, yes. So as we develop this roadmap, develop the business case for eligibility,
Go 2
we
years.
will then update the APD with the request for what the cost is going to be for that implementation.
Okay, great. And remind me again, without me going back, how far out does our roadmap go right now?
So right now, we spoke last time in testimony about integrated eligibility, providing those capabilities in the 25 timeframe. We're going to know more as we come through with the roadmap with NTT about where technology is at and what's actually going to be reused for technology and what we can do moving forward, because we want to leverage whatever we can that we've already invested in.
Okay, one more just technical. So cost allocation, just tell me what that layman, like what, so we get that determination and what does that allow us to?
Sure.
Yeah, I can take that question. So the cost allocation plan is essentially how we allocate costs to all of the benefiting programs that are benefiting essentially from the integrated eligibility and enrollment project. So it dictates how much we are able to leverage from the federal government across Medicaid, food and nutrition services programs, and it'll tell us how much state funds we will ultimately need to pay for the project.
Great, thank you, thank you.
It's a good transition actually to my slide, which is to talk about the financials for IE&E. So this slide is, my intention is to provide you from a state funds perspective, a high level summary of appropriations from 2017 through fiscal end 2021, expenditures during that time, and balances of state funds associated with the IE&E project. So the sections that are in blue reflect the appropriations that we've received over the last several years to support the integrated eligibility and enrollment project. The green section are the expenditures that we've incurred, just the state expenditures on this project over that same time period, 2017 to 2021. You'll see there's a line for the JFO IT consultant. I think Dan Smith is on the phone today. And so the legislature carved out some of our capital funds to support those activities. And from a state dollar perspective, we've spent a little bit more than $10 million state funds on IE&E over that time period. So that left us, when we closed out state fiscal year 2021, which just happened in the last couple of weeks, that left us a remaining balance in our capital appropriations of a little more than $4 million. Those funds are to help support the IE&E program in state fiscal year 22 and 23. Last legislative session, the legislature appropriated in the big bill in Act 74, $9.5 million of general funds. So switching out of the capital fund into general funds to support the IE&E program in state fiscal years 22 and 23. So that's high level, just the state funds. The next slide, and you may, those who were on this committee previously may recognize this format. This is designed to give a little bit more detail into the gross expenditure, meaning combined state and federal costs associated with IE&E. So let me orient you to the slide. On the left, well, we've got letters to try to distinguish rows if you wanted to ask any detailed questions about specific projects within IE&E. It breaks down spending by project. There's a status column to tell you whether that individual project is ongoing or has been completed. The first blue column gives you actual expenditures for state fiscal year 19. The green column gives you actuals for state fiscal year 20. The gray column for state fiscal year 21, the fiscal year that just ended. The purple column all the way over on the right provides a projected expenditure amount for state fiscal year 22. If you look at the blue row that's about 3/4 of the way down the slide, that gives you the total gross expenditures, either actuals for fiscal years that have closed or projections for state fiscal year 22. So you can see in the year that most recently ended, we spent about $9.8 million, a little under $10 million gross combined state and federal dollars on the IE&E program. If you recall, when we were here, I guess it was last December, I think that this committee may have last met right before the last legislative session. We were projecting to spend in state fiscal year 21, roughly $20 million gross. So you can see we spent about half as much as we had been estimating previously. I think there's two primary reasons for that. And one is probably the biggest driver, which you won't be surprised to hear that the pandemic also impacted the projects because some staff had to be reassigned off of the projects to deal with some pandemic work. So the project slowed down throughout the last state fiscal year. In addition, as Joe talked a little bit about earlier, working out the details of our cost allocation methodology with the federal government took, I think, longer than we originally anticipated, which led to a delay in the approval of our funding, essentially from the federal government. And so it also caused a delay. But I think the primary driver was the pandemic and staff focus elsewhere. For me personally, I'm really kind of coming back into the IT realm as it feels good to get back into more steady state. From an agency finance, we're still dealing with FEMA and all of the fund sources that have come into the agency, but it's less crisis and more just elevated workload over time. So, but to give you that context on spending in state fiscal year 21, we are right now, per the roadmap that the team has developed, anticipating to spend about $20.3 million gross in state fiscal year 22. Of that gross dollar of $21 million, $6.6 million, the number all the way over in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, that's what we anticipate to be the state share of those gross expenditures in state fiscal year 22. And as you can see, and Joe provided some more detail by project, this is what we are estimating to spend by each of these individual projects.
Yes.
So with the program support, we're looking at a doubling there, just high level. Why is that?
So there are multiple items that fall into that category, from state staff to professional IT service contracts to security contracts to hosting contracts. I think the primary driver of that increase is we are anticipating the staff that may have been reassigned during the pandemic will come back in to support IE&E in state fiscal year 22. I don't know, Joe or Darren or Rick, if there's anything you would add to that.
Maybe just an increase in those security efforts. We seem to be doing a lot more of security assessments. The feds are looking more into that, which understood, but there's an increased cost there too.
And so again, like looking over the past 3 years, 19, 20, 21, we're more in the 5 million range. So are these one-time expenses that we think we're seeing there, or should we expect like that's ongoing going to be at that $10 million?
My thought is right now, that's gonna be ongoing. I mean, we'll know more as we start to flesh out the details for the projects and the roadmap, because then we'll get into what is the resourcing need. As it stands right now, what we've learned, that's where we're at.
I think one of the things that we could provide to this committee going forward, because it is just July, so the new state fiscal year just started, but we do provide monthly financial updates to the IE&E steering committee and the leadership team, so that we track our expenditures. So how are we spending versus our budget? And that may be of interest to this committee as we move through the year. You know, this is a budget point in time, our best estimate for the work plan, what we're going to spend. But as we move through the year, we'll have a better sense of if we're going to be coming in at that $10 million level, or if it would be more in line with previous year's actuals.
Thank you.
Overall, do you have an independent firm that monitors progress on your applications? And if so, who is that and how do they report to you?
So we currently contract with CSG, which is the independent verification and validation company. The feds require, CMS requires an IV&V vendor. They've been on board for a number of years, and they provide monthly reports regarding the progress of the IE program in various categories, and that gets sent. We don't see it until they send it to the feds.
And then you presumably are required to respond, particularly if there are areas of concern or warning?
Correct. They will identify what they call observations, and then they'll provide recommendations how we could address those. And in some cases, we can work with them to look at what are the regard to the recommendations, what are the costs, what are the avenues we can pursue to address this.
Are there any recommendations or findings that right now exist that are either significant or high risk or pertinent that should be brought to our attention?
You want me to talk about? Sure. So thanks, Rick Stevenson. So the current status from the IV&V reports is that over the last year, they've converted risks that they've called red or yellow cautionary to now all of the categories, with the exception of one, are now green. They're calling us on track, with the exception of quality, which is yellow but trending green, where we're still working on some maintenance and operations processes to make sure that we can identify and plan accordingly on how we maintain these solutions as we create them. And we collaborate with IV&V multiple times a week. They've been very valuable to us with their feedback, and we've used that over the last year to turn things to where things are green. And so it's been very valuable.
There was a point in time where there was a significant cadre of temporary employees being used, again, in the remnants of Vermont Health Connect. Where does that stand now?
We do still rely on, when I refer to IT professional services contracts, I think that's what you're speaking about specifically, Senator Brock.
I'm partially speaking about that, but I'm also partially speaking about the vast number of people who were doing things manually that were originally designed to be done in an automated fashion, but that either never worked or were never completed.
Yeah, we have in the past, yes, we did use a lot of temporary staff to work on manual processes.
Maximus, I think, and a number of other firms like that.
Yes, and I think maybe take that as a takeaway to come back with you on specific numbers, because I don't.
Yeah, I'd be interested in how many folks are doing things that our automated systems were originally designed to do and never did. And that part of integrated eligibility was supposed to fix that. So that we didn't continue with that. And so I would be interested in just how big a cadre of this and what does it cost and how has it changed over time?
I was going to say real quick, so I think that's a great question and a great concern on our end, and correct me if I'm wrong here, folks, but I think a couple of our projects that we're currently working working on are focused around it as well. The driver was compliance, but the focus really was the Vermonter and the staff it takes to process stuff. So the MABD self-service, for example, is a way to try to reduce that workload for the Vermonter as well as the staff. And then the auto renewal is a big one where the Vermonter has to take a 16-page document, fill it out, mail it back in, process it. And even as we pilot it, I think it was 850 or so people, even during our pilot now, no longer have to do that. And the staff don't have to do that. So, I mean, even though we still have a long road ahead to get to where we want to be, we're trying to make those improvements to the Vermonter and the staff today as we go along.
Do you have any measurement of customer satisfaction?
I think our OCM team has some of that. I don't have it. I don't have information, but
Yes. Well, as you remember, that, historically, about many of these systems that impacted Vermonters, there were lots of people who were mad. We can't get into the system. It doesn't work. We're constantly having to call back. We have tons of paper to fill out. Nobody responds to it. You have heard all of the complaints, and the question is in doing all of this and the millions we're spending, is the customer experience getting any better? And if it is, how do we know that?
And I can't speak to the past on this, but I do want to say that we have ramped up the inclusion of organizational change management on the I&E side over the last year. And we have discussions weekly now about, as we go down this road of building out the new solutions, how we're going to reach out to customers, do surveys, have them look at the product that we're building, get feedback from them while we're building it, and making those improvements now, because that was a lesson learned. And even from my experience in the past in other areas of state government, that's extremely important to understand that before we go live. And then also talking about training and making that accessible and easy to use.
Well, I would be interested perhaps if at some point you're able to come back to us to tell us, how you are getting feedback from customers, how you are assessing whether or not the product that you are delivering is actually helping people.
that's a great question. We'll come back and provide that for you. Thank you.
Senator Pearson?
Part of the answer to the question I hear Senator Brock saying I believe there must be good news, because I certainly am not hearing it the way that I used to, right? And last year we've seen a swell of Medicaid enrollment, so that speaks to some smoothness there. But in the days when we heard a lot of complaints, a lot of it had to do with the billing and the payment through the vendor, through Nebraska, I think it was. And there was always this complication. I remember hearing horror stories of somebody who paid 30 cents too much, and then it was got rejected. It was rather a staggering state of affairs. So you mentioned early on that is shifting now to directly through the insurer.
Correct.
Right? This is, I'm assuming we're talking now in the exchange, people come in through the exchange. So what does that look like? Does that mean we're saving money if we're no longer having to support that third-party vendor? And can you help us understand what we would anticipate for Vermonters most of whom are getting a subsidy, and how does the subsidy route?
Okay, so I'll start and anybody can add in after. So yes, for the premiums and the payments going back to the insurers, that's going to help the Vermonter make sure that those processes are in place, right? The insurers have been doing this for years, and they've perfected those efforts for if somebody overpays or underpays, how to adjust it without impacting the services they're eligible for. So I think that's been addressed. We are also working on making sure that the communication mechanism in terms of the notices, having some improvements there so that the communication from the state is in line with what they may get from the biller for the benefits.
And Senator Pearson, to your point about savings associated with these moves, I believe it was state fiscal year 20 budget. We did incorporate into the operating budget some of the savings associated with the implementation of these features of the enrollment system.
So no longer having to pay that vendor is already incorporated into our operating experience. That cost. Okay. And then does the federal subsidy go directly to the insurers, or are we worried about confusion there? I mean, I guess I think of it this way. Blue Cross costs X, but the consumer doesn't experience it that way, the way that they would with a normal insurance product, right? Because there's a subsidy that comes in. So just explain to me how those pieces fit together, what it means to a Vermonter who's paying the bill, and the flow, if you like.
I think
The flow of the premium process.
Yeah.
I actually do not.
Yeah, so let me take that as a takeaway and get back to you. We're not in the weeds.
So what I'm trying to understand is the cost is, $520, but the federal subsidy is $220. Does the consumer just get a bill for $300? Now I've done math in public, $300, and it's effortless behind the scenes. I want to understand, this is where we get feedback of these horror stories that seem totally unfair and take a lot of emails and effort to untangle and leave, in this case, patients very frustrated. So just trying to understand with this shift, that flow of money.
Sure, we'll be glad to get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Single sign-in is one of the things that you talked about, so that people don't have to have multiple interactions to sign into systems. Secretary Quinn was here earlier this morning talking about single sign-in as something being done, or at least contemplated to be done throughout state government. Do you know if what you're doing about single sign-in is compatible with what he's thinking about doing for the state as a whole, or is this something that's going to have to change again?
I can answer that question. It is identically that same technology. In fact, it was the first of that implemented technology. It's a SaaS product called Okta, and we're basically using it in a variety of realms now already. So not just the document uploader, the Web 202 app that we're covering today, but we're also using it for doctors and nurses to help reset their passwords for the immunization registry. And we have a slew of other things on the docket to use it for, because that's been a long desired improvement for Vermonters to not have to have lots and lots of passwords for every single system that they use to interact with state government.
Are you using multi-factor authentication?
We are in certain cases. It really depends on the requirements of the application and the federal requirements behind it.
Are there any federal requirements that mandate multi-factor authentication?
There are, but they're not for VHC or IE yet. They're to get more nuanced about it, for the administrative people and state employees, we have the multi-factor already running. For the Vermonters, we do not yet. But we understand that those requirements are coming down and that we will have to turn that on.
And do you know how that will be done? In other words, what the multi-factor
what the other factor is?
Yes.
Oftentimes we get to choose. Some of the factors are more or less difficult or require a phone or an app or SMS capability. So or email or a phone call or something. So I think the key is actually to test it. Once you actually get it running, to test it on real people, real Vermonters.
Actually, it should be called aggravation factor authentication.
And you need to actually have a variety of options for people to choose from, because sometimes a person won't have a phone or a smartphone to load an app onto. So they need a different option to use. So it may not be just one, it might be a variety of factors.
Any other questions we finished? Representative Chase.
I would invite, I just did a quick survey when it first came up. I've got half a dozen different authenticators across 2 different phones. So perhaps using some of the more common ones, if we do choose an app that people might already have, I would encourage.
That's good feedback.
We're going to reduce the number of passwords and increase the number of authenticators. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very, very much. And I'm sure we will be seeing you again. And I think there are a couple of takeaways that you have from today. If you could perhaps send that back to the committee at your convenience, we'd appreciate it. And thank you for the progress we've made.
We certainly will, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Have a nice day. Good seeing everybody.
5-minute break.
All right. I think we have earned actually, I'll tell you what, we can have a